Welcome to A Pair of Bookends, the book club you can carry anywhere. We are your hosts and hopefully your new bookish pals. I'm Hannah MacDonald.
And I'm Lydia Clare. Welcome to a special bonus minisode of A Pair of Bookends as a little bookish gift from us to you. Today we are sharing the air with the wonderful author Emma Goude to discuss their heart-wrenching memoir, My Beautiful Psychosis, a book centred on mental health and Emma's personal experiences with dealing and living with it. We can't wait to deep dive into this one.
Emma Goude is a writer and award-winning documentary filmmaker. Emma began her career at the BBC Natural History Unit, directing documentaries for National Geographic, Animal Planet, Discovery, ITV and Channel 5 before moving into the non-profit and charity sector. Emma is the founder of the production company Green Lane Films and is currently working on Open Dialogue, a documentary that will encourage a new approach to mental health. Her first book, My Beautiful Psychosis, Making Sense of Madness, was published by Aeon Books in 2020, and she is currently writing her second memoir, Tango Camino Romeo, which explores finding love through the art of dancing tango. We're thrilled to be joined by Emma herself, so Emma, welcome to A Pair of Bookends.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here. A little bit nervous, but really excited.
You've got no reason to be nervous.
Not with us. Not with us.
You're in safe hands, I promise.
I wouldn't say that, but you know. So, Emma, we always love to start the podcast by asking, what are you currently reading?
Right, okay. On my bedside table, there are 3 books at the moment. One I kind of shelved, and I'm not reading. And the other 2 I'm reading. The first one is called Of Water and the Spirit by Malidoma Patrice Somé. It's a memoir. He's a West African shaman and healer, and it's his story of how he came to be doing what he's doing. Amazing story. I'm literally just on the last few chapters of that. And I've started, before I finish that one, because I've always got more than 1 or 2 on the go, I've also just started a book called Untangled by Lisa Damour. And it's a description of the 7 stages of teenage life, teenage development from girl to woman. So to help you parent your teenage daughter, so you can understand what phases she's going through. If she's not talking to you, it's like it's actually a good part of the process. It's not, it tells you what to worry about and what not to worry about.
That sounds great.
I feel like I need that for my 4-year-old.
Yeah. Yeah, she's 4 going on 14.
Yeah, 100%.
Oh, they grow up so quickly these days, don't they?
They do, honestly. She's so full of sass. I don't know how to deal with her.
That book reminds me of the one that we read, Lydia, is it the book You Wish Your Parents Had Read by Philippa Perry?
Yes,
It's very good, very good. And it's all about, how the way we're parented, the way that then passes on to our children, and how
it's like how you kind of you parent in a way that overcompensates for the faults of your parents.
Right.
So you try and overcorrect, and by overcorrecting you create a whole new set of problems as opposed to dealing with the ones that you had an issue with growing up. So it's such a fascinating thing. And she writes about it really well.
Good intentions, huh?
Yes.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's part of a parent's job in a way to fuck you up a little bit. You've got something to work with, haven't you? To become who you're meant to be.
Yeah. My parents did a great job. No, my parents are wonderful. She is. No, my parents are wonderful, but but no, I always joke with my mum about, we've had many conversations about it, about the way that my mum felt about her body and her body image, how she then passed that on to me when I was younger. And we've had to have many serious conversations over the years about how, the way that she was towards me was all good intentions, and it was all her trying to protect me from not feeling the way that she's always felt about herself. But it just then not traumatized, but it had its own impact on me. And we always joke about that. Good intentions have their own way of not being so great in the end.
Yeah.
And now on to My Beautiful Psychosis. It is a raw and unflinching exploration of your own experience with psychosis, and we both found it such a fascinating read, and it taught us so much. You know, we've both had our own experiences with mental health, and this felt like unlike anything that I've kind of read before on the topic. And I felt it was an incredibly brave and vulnerable thing to do, actually, and something, you know, it's very vulnerable to share those things, because I think whilst we have made improvements in society of the way that we talk about mental health and the way we approach it, I think there's definitely still a long way to go in kind of diminishing the stigma. Is that the right word I'm looking for, Lyd?
Yeah.
But yeah, as I said, there's still a way to go. And I wanted to ask, kind of, at what point did you realise that you wanted to turn your experiences into a book?
Oh yeah, good question. It was actually when I came out of hospital the first time, and this is way back in 1996 now, a long time ago. I came out of hospital, and because no one had asked me what I was experiencing, it just been kind of put upon the treatment that was given, diagnosed, treated, just left to my own devices, really. And no one had really asked me what was going on, what had led up to it. I just felt compelled to communicate that to somebody. So I started writing it, and it was like I just wanted to tell people what a really awful time I'd had. You know, that was my original motivation. And the first line, I remember the first line, I used to have romantic notions of madness. And that's not the first line of the book now, but it's still in the book somewhere. And I think I really wanted to set the record straight, because I thought what I was experiencing was absolutely beautiful and fascinating and had so much in it that needed exploring. And I wanted to get that off my chest. So although at that time it was like this sort of fantasy, really, that it would be a book, you know, oh, it's going to be this amazing book in my head. I think I really, you know, was just really driven to communicate from one human being to another, you know, what I'd been through, and needing to be seen in the world, you know, and needing to actually for someone to go like, wow, you know, wow, that's amazing what you've just survived, what you've just been through, you know, instead of it feeling like this shameful thing, you know, because you mentioned stigma, and yeah, we're talking a lot more about mental health in the world, but it's mostly about anxiety and depression. No one's really talking about psychosis.
Yeah.
You know, conversation I had with somebody recently, I literally just mentioned the word mental health. I didn't say anything about who I was or anything. And the woman kind of leapt towards this assumption that, you know, someone could possibly be a murderer. You know, that's kind of how we think of it, is like psychosis. Oh, you're a dangerous person. So I think because it was even more taboo then, I needed to be heard. You know, no one had asked me anything about it, and that's what compelled me to start writing it. I didn't finish it at that point. You know, I literally just started to write it, wrote a few pages and thought, I don't think I'm ready to write this. This is very self-pitying, and that's not what I want to say. I don't want to just go, oh, you know, look, poor me. And so I kind of dropped it at that point.
Why do you think that you didn't want it to be self-pitying? You know, why? Because I don't think it is self-pitying, but why do you think that thought came into your head? Do you think that was a thought that was kind of given to you by society, or was that just something within yourself?
No, I think it was some kind of deeper wisdom and a bigger idea of that actually this isn't a book that I set out to write. I did want to describe it in, you know, such a way that someone else is going to really understand and appreciate it. And I think if you're wanting something from them, like, oh, poor me, come and, you know, make me feel better, then it's kind of starting off on I don't know how to describe it, like it's kind of bound to fail in a way, because I needed to do that in myself first. So each time I took it off the shelf, I was a little bit more ready to tell the story. And, you know, and it took years a long, long time. That was 1996 with that first episode, and I didn't commit to fully writing a book that was going to be published until 2013.
Wow.
So there was a lot of life to live and a lot of processing of my experiences through meeting other people at conferences and stuff like that, before I was emotionally ready to tell a story which would engage other people and get them on board, because the story that I started telling was very much poor me, and that is a bit of a turn off. I just kind of instinctively knew that. I don't think it was necessarily a message from society. It was my own ambition for the story that I was going to tell.
Yeah, and I think it definitely doesn't come across as self-pity, and I think it's a brilliant and wonderful exploration of what happens, and you're very honest, which I think is very difficult with a subject matter such as this, and when it's so personal to you, to be so honest and vulnerable in a way. It's just incredible that you were able to write it in the first place, because that's a lot to go through. And there is a wonderful kind of exploration I found of sense and how one experiences the world when you're in a slightly altered mental space. How difficult or easy was that for you to translate your feelings onto the page?
It had a bit of a scale. Some of it was very easy because it was very clear in my mind and I really enjoyed describing it. I remember very beginning of the writing process, like 2013, when I decided, right, I'm writing this book and I found my in point. I remember thinking, I'm going to describe the best, I'm going to give the best description of insomnia I possibly can, so that any insomniacs out there are going to go, oh my God, that's exactly what it's like, and that's very clear to me. I can remember all the thoughts that go through your head. And so doing that kind of thing was very easy and I really enjoyed it. But then there were other times which were further away, even in my sensory memory, and writing about them would bring them closer and make them clearer and bring them back to me. But there were some experiences that I couldn't put into words, and sometimes I have to just say, I blacked out because I suddenly have zero recall, and it's like an alcoholic's blackout where they've got no memory and they know they functioned, they know they did stuff and said stuff, but they can't remember any of it, So that I couldn't actually describe except to say I blacked out or something along those lines. Yeah.
And when you were writing the book, did you have to go back to speak to family and friends that were around you at the time? And did you have conversations or interview them in a sense to get a full rounded thing of how they experienced you at that time? Because you say that you blacked out. Did you ever go to them?
I do remember, actually, and not as a general rule, I didn't, because there's two descriptions, there's two versions, isn't there? And this one is only mine. So I was very mindful that this was my mouthpiece and my opportunity. But I do remember, actually, there's a chapter in which on the shiatsu residential that I go on, and I black out in that. And I did actually go back when I was writing that, and I asked a couple of the students from that residential, I said, what happened? I remember being shouted at, but I can't, or I'm not even sure. Now I've written it, I'm not even sure what I can remember, I'm not even sure if what I've written is my memory or not. But I did definitely ask a few of the students and said, what happened then on that residential? Because I remember blacking out after this point in time. What happened? And they described it to me. And I didn't know it had happened. So I could write that. And I think I made it clear that I don't remember this, but I'm told that this happened, So for that particular blackout, I did. But generally, I didn't ask other people. But I did give it to my family before it was published for them to all read, so that I could remove anything they weren't happy, that was in there. But it is very much from my perspective, and that is only one truth. I think it's this kind of slightly, I wonder how much the reader thinks this is an unreliable narrator and what anyone else would have said about what was going on. But I don't give anyone else the opportunity because it is my book. So
I think that's interesting that you've said about whether the audience thinks it's an unreliable narrator, because I think, when you're going through those episodes, it feels like you're almost in and out of this dreamlike state. There is one thing that I wanted to speak about that really
Yeah.
resonated with me in the book, and that is you talking about when you worked at the BBC and how you felt maybe as an outsider, because you
Yeah.
talk about not being the one that's privately educated, being the northerner, and
Yeah.
me and Lydia are both actors. We speak about being northern and working class and kind of
Mm.
what we're bringing to the table in our industry, but also like how we kind of feel a little bit pushed out sometimes. And I found the way that you spoke about that experience really interesting. How do you feel that you maintained such strong self-belief, not only with that experience, but through kind of advocating for yourself during your episodes?
I don't think I did maintain any self-belief, actually. I don't think I had self-belief, to be honest. I felt like a fraud, in that environment. I felt like a fraud. And that was always in the background, causing anxiety. So then advocating for myself wasn't really necessary. I think they were very understanding, and they said, your job is here whenever you want to come back to it. Because I think my mum must have contacted them to say, she's not well. So I don't know if she told them I had a breakdown or so. I didn't really feel I had to advocate for myself, because there was this sort of understanding that, I hadn't been well. And then when I came back, it was so much later, it was 6 months later or something like that. And the job was no longer, they'd had to get a replacement. So that it was a temporary contract on a specific project. So yeah, I didn't really, I struggle with that. And I don't know if it's the artistic temperament, is that, everybody else is real and talented and I'm a fake. And I mean, over the years, I've got much, much better in believing in myself. And I think part of that process of putting my story out there really helped me with that, because the day it was published, I felt like my energy just went out like about 10 feet outside of my body, and like I was just strong and huge, and here I am. It was like this is who I am. And I was really, really happy with it, because I'd managed to describe it in such a way that was in a book that was being published, and that validated things for me. And I still do struggle with believing in myself, and it's ridiculous, because I'm incredibly talented, and I've made some amazing things, and I think the only reason I managed to survive so long in television was because other people saw that. When I was working at the BBC, I left because I effectively got headhunted by an independent company who they got their first wildlife documentary series. They'd never done wildlife before. And the presenter that they were working with, I'd worked with him at the BBC. And when they asked him, to recommend a researcher, he put me at the top of his list. So, I think people liked me, and I was seen to be good at my job, although I never thought I was good enough, and I'd have to do double the amount, to feel like, oh, I can stop worrying now, because I've done all I can.
I feel like that's quite a common thing with like creatives. This kind of imposter syndrome of kind of like, I don't know how I'm in this room with these people, because they're going to find out that I do not know what I'm doing. And usually every single person at that table is feeling exactly the same thing.
True.
But I do think it genuinely, that is very common with creatives, and mainly because I think that a lot of what we do isn't quantifiable. So there's not like a standard where it's like, well, you're doing great with this, then you're getting that feedback all the time, because it's so subjective.
Yeah.
I think it's difficult to kind of to get that validation. And so sometimes, like you've done, you have to go out, make the work yourself, do it, and then validate yourself.
Yeah.
Which, is a very difficult thing to do, but I applaud you for being able to do that.
Oh, thank you.
It's very
I remember the process of like looking for an agent to begin with. I spent about 6 months and didn't find anyone, and got so many rejections. And then again, trying to find a publisher, and the same thing happened. And as I was doing it, I realized, I mean, it got me depressed both times. I had to take a huge break before I went on to the next thing. And, I realized when I was doing it, I'm doing this for validation. I want them to tell me it's good enough to be published. And I realize now I've come to the end of the line with exploring the avenues for publication that I was exploring. And this is really testing me, whether I believe in it or not. And so I realized I did fully believe in it, and I didn't need them to believe in it. And that is actually when I found the publisher. That's when the doors started to open, was when I actually believed in it and didn't need them to give me that validation.
Did you self-publish in the end?
No, I didn't. I was going to, but actually the consultant psychiatrist who I asked to write the foreword for me, he was so taken back, so blown away. He said it was brilliant, such an amazing book, and he couldn't put it down, and he didn't want to leave it. He wanted to stay in the book when he finished it. He said, this has to be published, and I'm going to help you find a publisher. I know this guy. He's a psychiatrist, he's part of the Royal College of Psychiatry, but he set up this publishing company for mental health books. So he made that introduction, and that's how I got it published. I mean, we communicated with each other. I told him what my ambition was for the book, and he said, "Oh, I'd definitely love to publish it, but it does sound like you've got really big dreams for it. So why don't you go to, if you can't find a bigger publisher, he's just this small independent publisher, and people aren't going to necessarily see his books as much." And he said, if you can't find a mainstream publisher, come back to me. And I actually completely forgot about that, because off I went looking for the mainstream publisher, which I didn't find. And I thought, oh, I better self-publish then. And in that process, I remembered, I was like, oh, I'll just contact him again. and I was just in time, because he was literally in the process of selling his publishing company to Eon Books. And they didn't know me from Adam. They'd never published memoir before. And so he said he had a bit of sway with them. He had, and so he must have convinced them somehow to take me on. Maybe he lied and said he promised. I don't know what he did, but they agreed to take me on, even though what they normally publish are like texts about herbal medicine and stuff like that for people studying plant medicine, and nothing to do with memoir. So I stand out on their website as this only memoir.
That's incredible.
Yeah. So interesting story, really, the whole publication of it.
Yeah, I mean, I said in the intro that you've been published by Eon, but it is Eon, isn't it? Is that how you say
Eon,
it?
yeah, Eon Books.
And then I've just asked if it was self-published, but I wasn't sure, just because I got so invested in you telling the story about trying to find a publisher that I've completely forgot.
One of the things I wanted to ask you about, Emma, was the way that the book is formatted, because you split the book into sections which are based on the series of episodes that you experienced. Can you tell us more about why you chose to do it that way?
Yeah, the idea just came to me. Episode 1, because it's about like a TV program or something, isn't it? Episode 1, right? And in my little fantasy, I thought, well, that quite lends itself to television. This is episode 1, and I do call them my episodes. So I quite like that sort of double entendre with the word episode. And what it allowed me to do was to provide this structure which showed this clear difference and development that was going on throughout the episodes. Episode 1 is clearly the first one that just feels like it comes out of nowhere, and you get to kind of dip in and out of my life as the episodes return, rather than, it's quite hard if you don't delineate that we know doing it that way, then 6-year gap between episode 1 and episode 2, you've got to explain in some way, but it doesn't matter. I can just go straight to episode 2. Yeah, that was why.
I think it would actually work really well if it was adapted for TV, and I don't know like what your feelings would be about that, but I think it would lend itself very, very well to that. And I think it is such a visceral book that I could completely visualize everything you were speaking about in the book as though it was scenes playing out in my head. And we really feel like we're on that journey experiencing those episodes with you. And I think that's a real talent to be able to do that, to make the reader feel like they're on that journey with you. So yeah, I'd be very interested to see it adapted.
Yeah, me too. When I wrote it, and when I write generally, I do picture it like a film. It's like on a screen. It's all happening on a screen. And because I'm so influenced by the development of television and film industry that's changed massively over my lifetime. I get inspired a lot from structure of that. And although I'm not very visual, like in my mind, I find it hard to picture things that haven't happened or don't exist, or some people are very visual. I'm much more sensory, as in what I feel with my sense of touch. I'm not very visual, but when I write like it is a scene from a film of some kind. So, I mean, I would love it if it was turned into a TV series.
That would be amazing.
Well, you've got two actors that are willing to do it.
Brilliant.
I wanted to speak about the book that you wrote about in your book, and I've not found the title of it, but it's the Groff's book. Is that right? Is that the authors?
Yeah, there's a couple. Yeah.
So you spoke about reading that for the first time, and this kind of like revelation you had about your experiences, the way this book had made you feel. And I think you initially read something on their website, and then it triggered you to, not triggered you, but like motivated you to order their book and read that.
Yeah.
Could you tell our listeners what that was like for you, like that experience, and what that book is about?
Yeah, I think there were two books, and the one I think you're referring to is, I think it's called The Stormy Search for the Self. And it's a kind of amazing combination of authors, because on the one hand, there's Stanislav Grof, who's an Eastern European living in America, psychologist, psychiatrist. He studied consciousness mostly through early experiments on LSD, and psychoactive substances. So he's got a fascination for the nature of reality, the nature of perception, how our brains are working. And he was married to Christina Grof, who, after her first birth, she experienced what would be called postpartum psychosis. But he, because of his different perception of things and what she was experiencing, between the two of them, they saw it in a very different way. And they realized that this is a fundamentally, they saw it as a fundamentally different thing that's happening, that a process of awakening, when subconscious material is coming up to the surface, but you're experiencing this oneness. And so you haven't got the usual ego separate mindset to interpret what's going on. So it's very hard to confuse your experiences and just then take on board society's view of it as being mad, because we live in a culture which is kind of, we burn all our witches, or anyone who had any access to anything outside of this, beyond this physical realm. And church kind of took hold of spirituality and paganism and turned it into a kind of controlling religion. And we're left with science. So we're in this era of scientific understanding, and anything outside of that is just considered mad. Although science is like catching up with it now, with quantum physics and stuff like that, questioning the nature of reality. So reading this book, it basically said that it described all these experiences that I was having, and saying these are often misdiagnosed, as a psychiatric problem, and that like the person has psychosis, or worse still, schizophrenia, or and then medicated for life and never really helped. And that landed like this kind of just light bulb in my system of like, that is what has been going on with me. And when I saw it from that perspective, not only did it make me feel 100 times better than there's something wrong with you, you've got a broken brain, a brain chemical imbalance, and we need to medicate you to correct that. It also gave me an opportunity to explore the material that was actually going on during the psychosis and make sense of it. It wasn't random stuff. It's not like I saw a flying pink elephant, you know. It's the things that I was experiencing made absolute sense to me, and they told me a lot about myself, and mostly stuff that I hadn't resolved. You know, it's my past kind of coming up, and it's the opportunity to take a break from the life that I'm living and look at what I've been through and how my coping mechanisms are perhaps not the wisest, you know, for me to be able to function best in the world. And so it's an opportunity to change how I cope with life, you know, and so it's just fundamentally, it's changed everything. You know, I don't know what my life would look like without that book. I would probably be zombied out on medication, thinking there was something wrong with me, that I was bipolar and schizophrenic, paranoid schizophrenic, and I can never work again. You know, that's the difference. Or I'm an award-winning documentary filmmaker with a book published. You know, it's like, it's just that book saved my life.
Yeah, I think it's all about like reclaiming the narrative, isn't it? Like it's the narrative that's been created around mental health and mental illness is quite disempowering, and I think it's really important to reclaim that and to reframe it, and to not kind of see any kind of issues with mental health as anything more than, you know, we need to look at the root cause of that. You know, what has and I know you were saying before that we often speak about mental health just as about anxiety and depression, but my particular experience has been with quite severe anxiety, and what was important for me at that time wasn't to leap straight to medication. It was to figure out like what was going on. So I did a lot of work with trying to figure out like what had caused that, and, you know, unpicking all of that. And I think it's really important that we do that. And, you know, to be honest, medication has worked for me. So, you know, I'm not going to say that medication doesn't work, because it has worked for me. But I also think it's very important that we also look at the root causes of, you know, what causes poor mental health. You know, we need to work on our mental health just as much as we work on our physical health. You know, it's just as important. Absolutely. And we're not taught that.
Yeah, good for you, Hannah. Yeah, I think we are moving towards that, you know, it's an old idea, the idea that, oh, well, that person has mental health problems, as opposed to that person's going through this in their life and so struggling with this really big thing. You know, I think we're seeing it much more in terms of our social and environmental factors that are causing us to struggle.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that you talk about in your book is about having that kind of inner circle of support from friends and family. I know that's something that when I've experienced mental health issues, having the right people around me and having people that I can fall back on has been, I mean, Hannah's one of them, she knows, but has been life-saving in certain situations. How important do you think that having that kind of support system is in your experience?
Well, to me, it's the difference between having to go to hospital or not having to go to hospital. So, and since I'd rather not go to hospital, it's been totally, you know, essential, really. What I didn't realise when I first organised, you know, a group of people to rally around me so that I didn't have to go into hospital, was how much support they would need. Like, you need, if there's one person at the centre of the circle, you've got this inner circle of people supporting that person, but then you need a circle around them supporting them, you know, once removed from me. It's been an ongoing thing, and I've got so skilled at navigating now that I hardly need any support at all. I've got so many inner resources. I'm my own expert, if you like. And, you know, the amount of support I need is things like, well, someone to do the shopping, or, you know, so I don't have to go out to the supermarket where I might have a really horrible experience and things like that. So, and then I'm more likely to pay for professional support like acupuncture to help me with insomnia, or, you know, because I've got so used to I've explored so many different avenues that, my support can be from professional help. And because I've actually come, I had 5 years of traveling and being on my own a lot, I've had to really dig deep into my own resources. So I don't have as many people around me as I did when I lived in Devon and first made that support group that I wrote about in that book. But if people haven't got that around them, then there's more and more stuff online. I find there's even just having a WhatsApp group, and I in turn support other people, so a mother somewhere who's worried that their daughter's going into another episode and might be hospitalized, they call me a few times over the course of a week or two and avoids hospital altogether. And I can just help calm them, because the worst is actually just like there's the fear on top of what might happen. It's like you make it worse by being afraid of all what might go, where might this lead. And so I don't have to do much just to support them, on a Facebook, on a WhatsApp call or something. So
I think it's also testament to you as a person that you did have such a large group of people around you. It really speaks a lot about you and who you are as a person, that many people rallied around you. And I think, there's something really special in that. If it wasn't already obvious for our listeners, we would really recommend picking up this book. We found it to be such a fascinating read, and it feels kind of wrong in a way to say that we enjoyed it, but I think what you've written is such an important book. So thank you for writing it. But before we let you go, I really want to ask, what can your readers, once they've read My Beautiful Psychosis, what do they have to look forward to with your second book?
Oh, it's interesting. It's so different. My second book is called Tango Camino Romeo. And I actually thought, it was going to be a really fun, easy thing to write compared to My Beautiful Psychosis. But it's feeling a lot harder to write. It's a very adventurous kind of, the energy of, I don't know if you're interested in the tarot, but the Fool in the tarot pack is like this character who's got he's carrying a stick with a little sort of Dick Whittington style bundle tied to the stick that he's holding on his shoulder, and he's just leaping off a cliff, right? So that's kind of what I do. I go, right, I've come out of a marriage and I feel ready to explore the world of relationships again. And I just leap off a cliff to do that, basically. And so I throw myself out into the world of tango dancing, which I actually quit twice before. It brings up absolutely all my intimacy issues, that even going is just a nightmare. And so I then set off on the Camino. I get this weird call. I just absolutely know this. I won't spoil it, but this, I get this weird experience on an airplane where I just know, I've got to walk the Camino, oh, right. Okay. So I set up on the Camino thinking I'm going to walk the Camino for love, because I need to find love. But really, the more I try to find love, the more I find all of my issues and all the obstacles that I've put in the way to love. So I would imagine the reader isn't so much like learning like they do with the Psychosis. They've probably got their head in their hands a little bit, going, "What? Why did I? Don't go out with him," or And yeah, I have to come to some very harsh realities about myself, and I'm not going to spoil the ending for you, but I do end up in Buenos Aires dancing tango in the capital city of tango, where it originated, in this crazy tango scene, completely fallen in love with this Argentinian guy who's so inappropriate. And so yeah, it's fun, and I make it. It's as addictive as My Beautiful Psychosis, because I like to kind of just grab people by the throat and drag them along and make them keep reading and think they're going somewhere, following me, because they're only going to know as much as I know, if you like. And no, I won't give away the ending, but it's like
it sounds. You've already made it sound.
Them along, yeah. Oh, good. Take them along before I send them somewhere else. And that's all I'm going to say.
I love it. I just love it. That's just how I want to live. I just want to end up in Buenos Aires dancing tango. And Hannah knows that I probably will one day.
You would absolutely just go off and do that, yeah.
Good for you.
I don't ignore my impulses, which is sometimes gets me into trouble.
It's so good, but I don't know what you're like, Lydia, but I just don't think things through.
No, never.
Do it.
I should do it.
Should I just leave you two to it? That's it.
No, don't. It would be dangerous together. It'd be me and Emma on.
Oh, the scrapes I get myself into.
Oh, I empathise completely. Before we let you go, this has been a wonderful chat, and thank you so much for being on board with us today. It's just been absolutely brilliant. I would just like to ask if you've got any recommendations, books, film, TV, anything that you think our listeners need to watch or read. Have you got anything that springs to mind?
Well, thank you for inviting me on to start with. I've absolutely loved it. I think your podcast is great. So they're already listening to this, so I can't recommend it. But I'd like, two things actually. The book that I'm reading, Of Water and the Spirit by Malidoma Patrice Somé, that is incredible if you're interested in seeing mental health from a more shamanic perspective. Like for those listeners who are interested in that subject, absolutely the best book ever written. This is the second time I've read it.
Wow. And
for people who are really into podcasts, I'm really loving Gillian Burke, who is the presenter of Autumn Watch, Spring Watch, and works with BBC, and I know her from my BBC days. She's got this fairly new podcast called If I Rule the World. So she's looking at system change. She's talking to experts in the field of all sorts of areas of geopolitics, food, climate change, law, science, child development, like all facets of our world in terms of how do we create system change, what are the barriers, what are the invisible barriers. And she asks every single person at the end of that episode, if you rule the world, what would you do? So it just gives you so much hope. Like if anyone's kind of at the moment in this sort of post-pandemic heading, the world is heading towards the right, full, wars on our doorstep, and if they're needing to feel like there's more that could be done, and I want to hear about the people who are doing that and how the world can be changed, then I highly recommend that. If I Rule the World.
Oh, it sounds fascinating.
It sounds really good. I'm going to listen to that.
That's going to be my new dog walking podcast.
Great.
I'm telling you.
Emma, thank you so much for coming on to A Pair of Bookends. Where can our listeners find you on social media?
I'm almost everywhere. If they check out my website, emmagoude.com, they can find all the links and get a link to my book. But yeah, I'm Emma Goude everywhere, LinkedIn, Facebook. I have actually got a Facebook page, My Beautiful Psychosis, and Instagram, I'm Emma Goude as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And if you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to rate, review and subscribe, as it helps to boost us in the charts. And if you'd like to give us a follow, you can do so at A Pair of Bookends Pod on Instagram and at A Pair of Bookends on Twitter and TikTok. But Emma, thank you for joining us for this episode today. It's been wonderful.
Thank you.
Okay, goodbye.
Bye.